Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Rattlecast. We're the biggest freewheeling live stream poetry podcast on the planet, in your ear and on your laptop. You've got a front row seat for a wonderful episode today. Lew Watts is our guest. He'll be here in about 10 minutes, but we're going to say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We used to do all this because we love poetry. Now you do, so please do click on the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Whatever you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be much appreciated. That's all we ask for. It really does help if you click something to share things, and then the algorithms let them know that this is good content, and then more people watch, and then the world is a better place. So click what you can right now. Now, as always, we're going to start out with our Poets Respond poem. And the poem today was by Tonya Lailey. And Tonya is at a party tonight, so she couldn't make it. But she had this wonderful poem called Executive Orders. And about the poem, Tonya says, the photos of President Trump at the Resolute desk signing executive orders are piling up. For whatever reason, the March 26th one hit me in a new way. Maybe it's the Sharpie and seeing the name Donald being fully written out in a big, thick ink. I had been noticing how repetition renders ordinary the story of relentless executive orders. I wanted to explore the ordinary, the simplicity in the act of signing an office, be it the oval one or otherwise, the familiarity in the office work involved, the movements of people and papers. It is curious to me how such reckless and deadly expressions of power nonetheless adhere to certain codes of conduct, certain rituals. My ancestors' empty bowls flew in while I was writing. I feel they belong here. So it's an interesting poem, sort of an ekphrastic poem about Trump behind that desk signing executive orders. So here we go. Once again, this is Tonya Lailey reading today's poem. Hang on a second. We're having a technical... Why is that not working? Hang on. 1 second. We'll play this. We'll try this. Is this going to work now? I'm going to have to read it for you. Let's see. Well, that's never happened before. Okay, well, I'll read this poem then. Hello. Here we go. This is me reading. I'm not sure why the audio won't play. But here we go. This is Executive Orders by Tonya Lailey. Who in a back room prepares the folders, the ones that look like menus from 80s family restaurants? In the office, there's always a person, let's be honest, a woman who procures the staff birthday cards, then devises a way to circulate them in a binder, a folder, within a pad of paper for discreet signing by fellow workers. Does the executive order folder preparing woman take care of the White House birthday cards too, I wonder? May I take your order? Does she say that before whisking the folders off to the office of the Federal Register to be given a sequential number? In today's New York Times photo, just one folder lies open on the high gloss of the Resolute desk. Oak rests below the thick polish. Timbers taken from the British ship that shares the dusk's name. Earlier, New York Times photos showed folders in stacks like at a hostess station where families wait to be taken to a table. I remember those months, too, when there were so many birthday cards to sign at work that eventually I just signed my name without much thought for whom it was for or what anyone else wrote. I'd grab a juicy, inky marker like a Sharpie and use my time to form every letter in my name, as if that were the gesture, as if that were the work. I learned recently of an English ancestor on my dad's side who mastered his art of making wooden bowls. That's what he learned to do in life, so that's what he did. He turned wooden bowls with a pole lathe. Elm mostly. I read he didn't concern himself much with what happened to them after he'd made them. I once found a photo of him and his work shed in an archive online. He and his lathe in a murky light. Behind him, tower after teetering tower of empty wooden bowls. So that was the poem of the day, once again, by Tonya Lailey, Executive Orders. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Lew Watts. So sit tight and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Lew Watts. Lew Watts was born and raised in Cardiff, Wales. He lived and worked for many years in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa before moving to the United States in 2002. He's the author of the novel Marcel Malone and 3 poetry collections. His most recent, Eira, received the 2024 Touchstone Award. Lew is also the co-author with Roberta, Beary, and Rich Youmans of Haibun, a writer's guide. That is a book we've recommended many times here because Haibun's such a wonderful form. He also serves as the Haibun co-editor of Frogpond, the journal of the Haiku Society of America. Beyond poetry, he's the ex-chair of the World Bank's External Panel on Climate Change and a past board member of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Lew divides his time between Chicago and West Michigan with his wife Roxanne and his rascal-of-a-dog, Willis. And here he is, Lew Watts. Hey, Lew.
Hey, how you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. So glad to have you. You know, everybody's been talking about how much they loved the interview and how much it opened the whole world of Haibun to them, which was, of course, our goal. And so we really appreciate you having on, being a chance to share some of the actual Haibun we were talking about in that interview, among others. Do you want to start out by reading one of them?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, that interview was amazing for me as well, Tim, because it opened up things that I didn't even know about. So that was great. Yeah, I thought thanks very much for having me, by the way. I thought I'd start off by reading the very first Haibun from my book, Eira, and it's called Hiriaith. And I thought I'd explain the word Hiriaith before I lead into it. Because the Haibun itself doesn't need much other explanation. So Hiriaith is a Welsh word. It's quite famous because people say that it really can't be translated. The closest is a sort of deep yearning for home or a place or a time one can never return to, and or perhaps that never was. So that's Hiriaith. So here's the Haibun Hiriaith. I was born 56 years ago in Cardiff, Wales, in the slum district of Splot. On days when I wasn't getting the shit kicked out of me, I would never have imagined being in Washington, D.C. on this April day. Everyone is nervous. Fathers check their watches. The mother readjusts her son's necktie. And even the newborn, swaddled in lace, as a luster of sweat. As the hour approaches, the doors open. Form a line, the guard says, and remember it's alphabetical. Free school lunch, the hollow clang of a soup ladle. An usher leads us into an oak-paneled room. We state our family name and country of birth before taking our seats, the final check that we're in order. I count 4 men from Somalia. Their knuckles are white. We sit in silence. No one coughs. Suddenly, a judge steps onto a podium flanked by 2 American flags. He is solemn, dignified, and he speaks of the history and importance of the ceremony. A woman in a hijab begins to shake. We're asked to stand, right hand raised. The words of the oath of allegiance appear on a screen, and the room speaks in a low murmur. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince. Dad's will, his old Zippo in the thumbprint. We're welcome to the United States of America. As we file out of the room, a woman in a large purple headdress hugs me, and several men shake my hand. The same guard opens the main door, and we spill out into the light. Unknown friends appear with confetti. Gradually, the crowd begins to disperse. Gust of wind, out of the street gutters, cherry blossoms. I should feel joy and gratitude, but I can't escape the sense of my betrayal of where I'm from. And that's when it hits. The gut punch ache of longing for all that's lost, for all that's gone, and the bittersweet sound of a word I know will never stop.
And that's that was Hiriaith from Eira by Lew Watts. And it's a wonderful example of the Haibun form, Lew. The way that it feels, there's so many different ways you can use the Haibun. But in that one, there's this sort of parallel worlds, the way your interior world exists in your memory and the things that are come up as you're standing, places like that described there. and the real world. So there's like superimposition that's going on in there. It's like a separate world that's sort of coming to life through those haiku. But so how do you define Haibun, and tell us what a Haibun is for those who don't know? Because when we do this podcast, we always have some people who have read everything you've done, and we have some people who have no idea, and we want to cover everything for everybody if that's possible. So what are Haibun, and how do they function? Why are you drawn to them?
So the easiest way to describe what a Haibun is it's basically text with one or more haiku. And the reason I say text is because, and I'll use prose as a substitute, but text basically encompasses everything because it could be a section of prose in which or after which or before which there are one or more haiku. Or it could be, I've seen Haibun where the text is a shopping list. I myself have written them where the text is a telex or a telegram. There are some where there's verse. The one that you kindly published in this issue of Rattle has verse in it. The key thing about it is that there has to be, if you like, a space between the haiku and the prose. So the way that people commonly describe it is that the haiku somehow link to the prose, but they shift away from it. And the degree of shift has to be just right. If it's very, very small, it doesn't really add much. Well, sometimes that's useful. But if it jumps too far, you lose the reader. And you write Haibun for the reader, ultimately. So this particular one, the only thing I'd add to it, really, is that that definition I gave of Hiriaith, right towards the end, it talked about this nostalgia for a place or a past. And it said, or maybe that never was. And that's a bit of a hint to what that poem means, because obviously it was about my citizenship ceremony. But this longing for a past that never was, maybe it never was. And that's what opens up in many of the Haibun in Eira. Mm-hmm. That's what I would add to it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, well, that's definitely helpful. And let's step one step back further and say, what is it? How would you define haiku? If it's the combination of some kind of text plus haiku interspersed for it to change the effect and to deepen the effect, what is haiku then? It's sort of a begged question.
Yeah, I know one should never come out with negatives. So just to finish up on Haibun is not a travel journey. And many people seem to be of the view that they can write about some journey they've taken. It can be about anything, but it's not a travel poem at all. Haiku is capturing a moment. And I use the little definition that if haiku captures a moment, Haibun captures an experience. So that moment is a moment in time, and it's commonly two elements. People call them two images, but let's say two components, a shorter and a longer. And between those two, there's a cut. And I think everybody who talks about contemporary English language Haibun would say that, haiku, I should say, is that really a haiku has to have that cut. Because that cut is basically creating the space between those two images that provides the opportunity for the reader to explore. As such, it's a minimalist poem. It doesn't say everything. It leaves much to be interpreted. And that's basically what a haiku is. It's capturing a moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can look at the, some of the Haibun or haiku from that Haibun. And so if we put that back on the screen for just us, although you can't see it too, it's free school lunch, the hollow clang of a soup ladle. And so can you illuminate that haiku a little bit for us? We have the image of the free school lunch, or the concept of the free school lunch, and then the soup ladle. So narrowing in on that and the sound that we hear and the hollowness of that clang. So do you remember writing that haiku and how that haiku came to be by any chance? Or how would you go about approaching, turning that concept, the free school lunch, into something like a haiku?
Yeah, I distinctly remember writing it. And actually, funny enough, that moment That moment repeated itself many, 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 many times. So if you think about the prose beforehand, it ends with it's alphabetical. So in other words, in that ceremony, we were lined up alphabetically. Now, you probably know my surname is Watts, and so that's a W. So I was almost at the end of that queue in the ceremony, and I was always at the end of the queue for a free school lunch. And in my school, my I suppose over here you say a grade school between 5 and 11 years of age, we had free school lunches because we were poor kids. And by the time I got to the front of the queue, the soup was gone. And so it was easy for me to capture that moment as a free school lunch, the hollow clang of a soup ladle. That's what you get when you're at the end of the alphabet. That's how it came about, Tim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, those are great descriptions, both of the Haibun form and the haiku, which is maybe probably the most misunderstood form of poetry there is. The haiku, obviously it's not just a 17-syllable micropoem. It really doesn't have anything to do with syllables. It has to do with that experience that it creates, that capturing the moment by mixing things together in a surprising way. And so I think that's a great example and really great explanations. And then how haiku plays into it too. Do you want to read the next haiku that you have lined up? I mean, Haibun, I should say.
Yeah, sure. So the next one I've got is matriarchs, and a little bit of introduction to this. When I was young, my mother unfortunately was mentally ill and spent most of her time in a mental institution, and so it was difficult for my father to cope. He was a steel worker, and so I was farmed out to different relatives for long periods of time, basically aunts. And all but one of them were pretty spiteful. Um, and the husbands were worse. But I think the worst thing was that I would sit surrounded by various aunts and I would listen to conversations, and they were spiteful. They never had a good word to say about any other woman, and they disparaged other women. And I decided I'd write about that because while it was spiteful, it was also funny because they really had nothing to, how do you say it? People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So while they criticize other people's looks, as we would say, they should have looked in the mirror at themselves. So I wanted to write this. Now I wrote the prose, and I really, really struggled with the haiku. And I wanted to have a haiku that basically deepened but said something more than that prose. And eventually it came to me because I asked myself, well, why am I writing this? Why is it so important? And I came to the conclusion that I'm writing it really, truly to show the irony behind people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So you'll see this in the haiku. Matriarchs. The closer one came to my mother's side of the family, the more refined the insults. My father's sisters had no problem with the simple word ugly. They could embellish at times. Looks like she's been hit by a bus was a favorite. Of course, my maternal grandmother usually hid behind her Welsh, whispering hush at facial hair and bald babies, or ach a v at cold sores and bad feet. And so it was a relief to hear her simply call me plain one day. As for ma'am, she had the same word for every girlfriend I brought home. Unfortunate, she'd sigh, followed by a sniff. Christmas afternoon, chasing down smoke rings from the hole in Gran's throat.
And those matriarchs by Lew Watts from his book, Eira. And in that form, Lew, where you have the title, one short prose section, and then the haiku, is probably the most common form of the Haibun we see. Although that's not where it came from. When Basho began writing Haibun and the form developed hundreds of years ago, there was a lot more of integrating haiku within longer sections of prose and, like you said, travel writing. And it's become more than that. But then at the same time, it's sort of narrowed down to this structure very often. And so why do you think that is? What do you think about it, about the title, the one paragraph, the haiku, makes that a form that people use so often?
Well, if you turn it around the other way, there are, and in fact later on I'll read one. There are Haibun where it starts with a haiku, and the one I'll read actually only has a haiku to start. Those haiku that, if you like, are before the prose, they set a scene. That's what they do. There's no fireworks. They set the scene, and then the prose follows. And if there is fireworks, and I usually call it a hard landing, it's at the end of the prose. It's a wallop. And if it's a really big wallop at the end of the prose, like the big aha surprise, it's difficult to put a haiku after that because you steal the thunder of that prose. But the reason that this form, I think, is so common is it does allow that leap. So if you have a block of prose and you have a haiku to finish, you've got basically three kinds of haiku that could finish that. You could have a haiku that takes that prose and, if you like, clarifies something about it. So the prose itself, a lot of Haibun prose is very flash, and it's like saying less to mean more. The less said, the better. So you leave space. So in that haiku, you can clarify some of the things that you've missed out in that prose intentionally. You could have a haiku that actually deepens what's said in the prose, takes it further, if you like. Or you can have the big leap, the wham, that, oh my God, where did that come from? Oh, I get it. That kind of, rather like, I like to think that that one with the hole in Nan's throat is a bit of a bit of a leap or sort of whack. So that's why it provides a lot more opportunity for what you can do with those haiku to follow the prose.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that because, and we haven't mentioned yet, but you're professionally a geologist, and so thinking about mechanisms and the way things work, and how you have the appearance of something after millions of years, eons, and then piecing together how changes on the Earth shaped it and turned it into that is something that must fascinate you. And so it's cool to watch you think and explain about how Haibun work in the same kind of way, dissecting and peeling back the layers of what's there. So let's go back to the first, when you started writing. We talked a lot about in the print interview about how you were drawn to haiku, because you were writing other forms of poetry too. I mean, originally, and then you moved on to haiku, and then you found Haibun. And you're really known as a Haibun writer. And so why is it, what's special about the Haibun that's so different from other forms of writing?
Well, first of all, I adore haiku. So let's put that there. I mean, I love reading haiku. I like writing haiku, etc. But Haibun for me, it provides a lot more opportunity. I like the sound of prose. I like the rhythm of prose. I like the way that you can actually pace prose. And you can put so much emotion in prose beyond, if you like, simply writing words of emotion. So I like it. The second thing is that, and I thought quite a bit about this, Tim, because it came up in our conversation. Um, Now, we didn't have this in the conversation, so let me tell you. Until I was 16 years of age, I'd only ever read two books.
Hmm.
We had no books in my house. Those two books I read, I had to read because I had an English exam when I was 16, and I passed. God knows how. And I can even tell you what they were. Lord of the Flies was one, and I think it was Northanger Abbey was the other, which why they gave Northanger Abbey to a all boys school, I don't know. But anyway. And so instead of that, all the stories I heard were in conversations. And in fact, we didn't even have a TV at home. In fact, we didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a toilet inside either, for that matter. But so everything was told in stories. And because the Welsh accent, and I've lost a lot of my Welsh accent, but if I were to talk in a Welsh accent, it would be like that because it goes up and down and they pronounce the consonants a lot. So you'll be listening to this lyrical stories back and forth, and it's stuck in my brain. And so I like writing and I like reading prose like that. And then combine that with the haiku, and then you have the Haibun.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, let's hear another one.
okay. So this is a very important Haibun for me. This is called deposition. I'm a geologist. And Tim, because I can't see it, have you got a fossil fish photo up there,
I
or did
do,
you?
yeah. I'll put it up right now for everybody. We have it up. Yep.
Yeah. So this is a fossil fish from the Devonian. It's Osteolepis. It's 380 million years old, and I'm only going to show you that because it features in this Haibun. So the way this Haibun came about was that I was asked by somebody, what was the most amazing thing you ever saw as a geologist? And seen a number of things, but this one stood out. And I was in the Orkney Islands off the north of Scotland, and we happened to be looking for fossil fish. And I decided I'd write it. So I wrote the prose, and because I'm a geologist, I couldn't escape putting some scientific terms in there, but I tried not to. I tried to make it more conversational. And then I'm searching for the haiku. And this haiku popped out, and I was horrified. And I wanted to take it away. And part of the reason for that was that so my mother killed herself eventually, and I've never really been able to talk about it until I started writing Haibun. And I've written one Haibun early on when I was writing Haibun that talked about the fact that I could never remember dreams at all. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't been able to remember a dream since I was little. And I now know from, therapists, what therapists say that it's suppression. And this was an extreme form of suppression that I couldn't talk about what had actually happened. And then this haiku popped out. So, and I think you'll see what I mean when I read it. So it's deposition. Help yourself, the quarryman says. Steve saunters over to the dark layer, then motions for me to come. This is indeed what we've been looking for, the Sandwich fish bed of Devonian age. The rock splits easily, and we find fragments of the armored fish Cocosteus, and an occasional fin. We note a sheen preserved on many split surfaces. This is primary current lineation, caused by the alignment of tiny mica flakes as water sloshed across the ancient lake bed. The sheen marks the orientation of the paleo current, but not its direction. Suddenly, I hear a yell. Steve has found something. There, in the middle of a large mica sheen surface, lies a complete osteolepis. The fossil fish appears perfect, though one scale is missing. 9 inches away, along the primary current lineation, we find it. Where she was found, my mother's head pointing against the tide.
And that was Deposition, another poem from Eira, and a really profound poem, Lou, for all the ways that writing is really a magical and special experience psychologically and emotionally. To have a topic you don't even realize what you're writing about, and yet subconsciously you want to express something and you're trying to express something. And then this just pops out like as if you didn't write it, some other part of yourself wrote it that's not the you. And that experience of that is so profoundly healing, personally, I'm sure, and then also profoundly moving for us to experience that kind of connection with the self. So, what can you tell us about what surrounded that? Like after you wrote that and that popped out, and you said you wanted to throw it away, what did you do with it after the fact?
Well, the very first thing I did, I wanted to throw it away. Very first thing I did was I had to come up with a title. And I know let me come on to this now. So people write things in different way. I think the majority of Haibun poets write the prose first, and then they write the one or more haiku after that, and the title comes last. And in our book, Haibun: A Writer's Guide, we go to great lengths to say that those three components of prose, haiku, and title are all important. Like title's not a throwaway. It's an integral part of the poem. And this one illustrates it because the way one would read this is you'd read deposition, prose, 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 prose. Okay, he's a geologist, and his mother. Oh, something happened to his mother. Whereas in reality, what you do is you read the title, you go, deposition, okay. Then you read the prose and you say, well, why is he writing about this? Then you read the haiku and you say, oh my God, I get it. Yeah, okay, so he he can imagine the sediment trailing away from his mother because and maybe there's a sheen next to the sand in the direction the current is. So it surfaced that for his, his memory of his mother. And then you go back to the title and you say deposition. Well, do you mean that it's deposits that he's talking about, or deposition in terms of a legal deposition? Because this is a statement, it's a deposition as well as deposition. So that title has two meanings. And the second meaning is only, if you like, opened up after you read the Haibun itself. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we say, people should strive for with titles, that in retrospect, when you read that title, after reading the prose and haiku, it takes on a completely new meaning. So that's the first thing I did, Tim, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And then I put it in a drawer and tried not to look at it for 2 weeks. I was frightened of it.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, it's one of those things that you've been trying to integrate into yourself for so long, and then there's the block on it. And it's really we talk so much about whether or not poetry is a therapy. And, if you had that revelation and made that connection in a therapy session, it'd be like a breakthrough session just for that, not even having the artifact of the poem left behind. It'd be something to remember and think about. And then yet we have that because it's the magical nature of poetry is that we go into the depths of ourselves and we pull back this artifact, this record of the journey. It's like a map to the meaning that we've made in the process of writing the poem. That's really why poetry is so valuable. And what I love about the Haibun form is it's like a roadmap for how to do that. Right? I mean, so often if we're critiquing poems, we say, well, we don't know where we are. There's no sense of context. There's no, you're leaving the reader out. And you mentioned before, Haibun are really written for readers, And so having that, the prose, which sets up all of the journalistic questions, the who, what, why, where, and when, we know that we're in a place and we know it's being written for a reason. And so you're not lost. And then you get hit with that deep meaning. And then it swirls around with the title and becomes something to remember as a discrete object that you can carry with you. And I mean, it exemplifies what a poem should be, I think, in the form, especially when it works well, but just the structure itself is how any poem should function, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And in fact, that leads on to something I probably should have said when you asked me about why I like writing Haibun, and I said prose. So the other thing about the prose is it gives you many different options on how to enter the poem. And I know that it's like that in all forms of poetry, like how do you approach something? Which direction do you approach it? But in Haibun, because the prose, we're so familiar with prose, it's really obvious that it is a challenge. I can sometimes spend 2 weeks on a particular idea just thinking how I'm going to enter that. And it's not a simple thing like in our conversation, Tim, we talked about the fact that, if you talk about a journey, I think the one I used was I get up in the morning, brush my teeth, get on the bus. I take the bus out, get off, walk across a field, and I'm on the edge of a cliff. The reader's not interested in that whole story. The reader just wants to know I'm at the edge of a cliff. Because then the reader says, wow, how did he get there? Why is he there? What's he doing? And that's one way to enter. But there's other ways to enter the prose. And it's something that I'm starting to think about and start to write about now with some examples. Because there are, in fact, later on, there's a poem, I'll tell you when it comes up. I'll show you that, I'll talk about it beforehand. I spent a long time how I could deal with a difficult subject, and I finally cracked a way, I think, of how I enter it. And once you're in, then the prose is easy, relatively easy, but that entry is very difficult, I found.
Yeah. And that insight that you had, I mean, I think to me, how many times have you had roughly that experience like that where you completely shocked yourself with writing? Is that something that happens, more frequently as you have this rubric really for finding that space. With the Haibun allows you to, it opens up the door to make leaps, I guess, is what it really does. So you come to the end of a section and you can jump somewhere surprising, and that kind of is liberating, I imagine. And then you have more leaps. But do you find yourself frequently surprising yourself with your writing because of haiku more so than you used to be?
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, that is the one that's the biggest. I mean, that was like a deep shock. But I would say certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 or 6 Haibun, the haiku have got elements, not the whole haiku itself, though, Tim. Maybe the last line of the haiku. It's like, oh boy, oh, I didn't expect that to come out. There's that element. And yeah, and it's and by the way, I don't want to make this sound as though uh, like I'm a total depressive. This is, I mean, I'm a very happy person. In fact, I'd say half of the Haibun in Eira are actually upbeat, and certainly my life today is a very happy life. But so some of the shocks are not just, oh my God, that terrible thing appeared on the page. It's sometimes, oh my God, do I want to share that? It could be a secret. It could be something that you you thought you'd never write about. I won't go into details, but you can imagine. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear another one, Lou.
So we read I read the first one in Ira. I thought I'd read the last one. Um, Little story behind this is very simple. It was very difficult for me to talk about my childhood to my own kids, and then when I came around to talk about it, I didn't get a very good reception, and I don't blame my sons for it. But at the time, it was pretty traumatic, and I decided I'd write about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this particular one, we've workshopped in various forms, and I won't go into detail, but there's a lot of assonance in this one, and there's a lot of repeats of white, the color white, and the concept of snow. Um, so it's called The Fairest One. It was 30 years ago to this day. I remember that it was cold outside and there was a full moon, just like that other night. You'd both cleaned your teeth and were tucked into bed, and for the first time I decided to mention her. I can still see the eye rolls, still hear that long, sarcastic snigger. That's when something broke inside of me. And I never have spoken of her since, and I never will, except this. Her hair was coal tar black, and her psoriasis sloughed off flakes as white as her skin. You've never asked, but her name was Eira, the Welsh word for snow. A sudden flurry, my mother's screams from the quiet room.
Yeah, and that was the fairest one from Eira. Really, really powerful poem, and that direct address to the reader. We've read at this point the whole book, and it's one of my favorite turns in a book I've read recently. You've never asked, but her name is Eira, and which I think the whole time, thinking about the title of the book being that you don't really think about it, and then all of a sudden you're like slapped in the face with that. And the whole book sort of comes together in this really, really magical way. It's really wonderfully done. How did you, in the prose, how did you come to that movement where you're going to address the reader? Really, I think for the first time, if I remember right, directly, and right at the end of the book, which is kind of shocking. How did you come to do that?
Well, so one thing up front, all of the Haibun in the book were published before. And so the fact that it appears at the back of the book was a choice that I made together with the editor, John Barlow of Snapshot Press. And so I'm saying that, it probably sounds obvious, but I didn't write the Haibun to end a book. But the more we looked at it, we knew that my mother features in the book. The book isn't all about my mother, but it was a strange coincidence, maybe, that each of the 6 sections has one major poem about her. And John said, we really should think about this. And so I said, well, I have this Haibun I've written, and we could place it at the end. And we debated it a bit, and then both of us realized it was like a light bulb going off. Well, yeah, I mean, it's like the big reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And once that was done, up until then, we didn't have the title of the collection. And as soon as that was, if you like, the final poem in the collection, then we knew that the collection had to be called Eira. And so it's rather like the collection as a whole is like a Haibun. So the collection just gives you snapshots of events in my life. Some are sad, some happy, some in my childhood, some now. And they're connected and driven along by blocks of haiku in between, so that when you turn a page, you're never quite sure where you are or what time you are. Is this youth? Is this later? Sorry, my computer's bobbing away. And it ends with that Haibun. And then all of a sudden, people say, oh, okay, there's an arc.
Mm-hmm.
The arc between Hiriaith and the happy past that never really was, and this final Haibun.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to achieve.
Yeah. Do you think, having such a traumatic childhood with so much, I mean, we've already seen some window into it, and then not being able to talk about it later. You mentioned not having dreams, never having been able to discuss your mother's death. And then when you try to talk about it with your family, it being a difficult subject that, didn't really, have a receptive audience for. But yet you were very happy and productive life your whole life, like completely outside. If you'd never, written a single, poem in your life, we'd say, oh, Lew Watts is a successful, well-adjusted, happy person, And so that's not always the case, I guess, with poets. And yet, so what do you think about the way that getting that off your chest? Do you think that was something that moved you forward? Are you more adjusted and better off having reflected on this? Or, because you've said a few times that so much is for, the audience and the reader, and sharing that story is for their sake. How much of it has helped you internally, would you say?
Oh, I mean, enormously. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think the people close to me, my wife Roxanne, would say that certainly since I've been writing Haibun, I mean, I've changed for the good. I don't want to say that because it sounds as though I'm saying I'm good. I'm not. I'm a really bad person, but I'm a lot more content. I've always been a happy person, but I'm a lot more content. But I mean, other things beyond poetry, by the way. So I didn't suffer fools gladly when I was a manager in my early days. And I think I was a pretty hard manager. And part of the reason for that was I was carrying a chip on my shoulder. I had it tough when I was young. So you guys that are born with a silver spoon in your mouth, pull your finger out and get working, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one stage I was in Nigeria, and I had a young Nigerian guy working in my organization, and I was reaming this guy out for being repeatedly late from work. And then I discovered, because someone told me, that his commute was 7 hours. 7 hours in, 7 hours out.
Wow.
And I felt that big. And so that was a huge lesson. And then I credit the third, my wife Roxanne, who's managed to get me to stop flying off the handle. And I would fly off the handle quite a bit. But in recent years, I guess getting a lot of these things out in the open and off my chest, yeah. I mean, I credit Haibun with that, sure.
And sort of along those lines, Jewel N has a question about being open and how much to reveal. Jewel says, how do you decide to edit yourself when revealing personal or traumatic events and decide what to reveal to the public? And that's a big question for all writers. I mean, we have like we've talked about so much already, having that insight into yourself is so powerful, but then to share it is a big question afterward. And how much should we share? And is there such a thing as oversharing or not? So how do you negotiate that, deciding what to reveal and what not to?
Yeah, I think there are certain things that you probably shouldn't be sharing. I mean, you may feel you may feel bad about certain people, but you don't want to go bad mouthing individuals in poems. But for me, and we touched on it in the conversation, if I feel if I feel positive enough to actually write a Haibun and I feel positive enough to submit it, I'm doing that because I want to share it. So if I surface something that is very personal, um, it would really be, it would have to be something very, very, very embarrassing for me not to want to finish the process and submit it. Because, like I said in the conversation we had, which you published in Rattle, I think putting it out there is the final stage of the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe embarrassing things for me, maybe, but then I wouldn't write about them. But certainly don't want to be disparaging other people by name.
Mm-hmm.
That,
Yeah.
but yes, the subject.
Mm-hmm. On a different thread, the last interview before you in Rattle was with Dean Radin, a parapsychologist, talking about, he does studies and things like remote viewing and things like that. And one of the things I was thinking about asking before we were talking and never got to was if you've ever had any insights that are outside of yourself, because that's one of the fascinating things that come up sometimes in poetry, just really in any creative endeavor. One of the things they do is, what do they call it? The remote viewing. You're drawing random pictures and then you realize what it is and you kind of learn about something that way, And he has, he's a very rigorous scientist, actually, who studied these things in controlled settings and finds, interesting, small but real, real effects. Have you ever surprised yourself with something that wasn't internal, like something you didn't know you knew? Are there sort of strange surprises that ever come out? Because the Haibun form is so much about surprise. So, like, is there anything else that pops out besides for just internal insight?
Yeah, I mean, so I had one recently, Tim. Funny enough, you should say that. So, we talked a bit about caving and the rest of it, right? So, I don't like heights. Okay. I really don't like heights. I don't like being on the top of a building close to a wall that's only up to my shins. But in a cave, I can literally stand with half my feet over a ledge and have a drop of 300 feet and look straight down, and I feel nothing. And I convinced myself always it was because the reason is there's no wind in a cave.
Hmm.
I'm not frightened of being blown off. And so, and that was, if you like, how I left it until I started writing and I realized that I'm drawn to cliff edges.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not saying I'm going to jump off a cliff edge, don't get me wrong, but there has to be a reason why I'm drawn to it. And I've written two Haibun in the last couple of years, but in both of them, I'm either just about to do something pretty bad, or someone has pulled me back at the last minute, and there must be some subconscious thing that's going on there. And that was a big revelation to me because I was always explaining it away by, oh, I just don't want to be blown off the top of a building. But that was a big one,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's definitely really interesting, and I just find that topic so fascinating because
Yeah.
there's so much, really, there's so much of the world that we don't know. There's so much mystery, and thank God, because if there weren't mystery, it would be freaking boring. you know. Um, well, anyway, I should say at this point, if anybody has any questions for Lew, please leave them in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. I'm keeping an eye on both. And leave, if you put question like colon or something like Jewel did or anybody else, that helps me to see it as I'm flowing through and looking at all the comments. But in the meantime, you want to move on from Eira and do some other Haibun. Do you want to read another one?
Yeah, sure. So this is uh, clocking out from the crab factory. And I'm not going to say much about this beforehand, because I think it's quite obvious. But I am going to make a comment, Tim, after it. Um, so one thing I will say is, and I'll just point this out. Sorry, this sounds as though I'm like giving a course on how to write Haibun. It's just that I know you've asked before that there's a number of people that really don't know much about Haibun, so I just wanted to explain a couple of, if you like, techniques. The prose in this ends with a big thump, okay? And Roberta Beary, who was the editor of Modern Haiku and co-author, by the way, of Haibun, a Writer's Guide, she told me as soon as she saw this, she wanted to publish it because of the last line of the prose, okay? So it ends with a thump. And as I told you before, once it ends with a thump, it's difficult then to find a haiku to follow that. So I'll read it and then I'll make a comment on that. Clocking out from the crab factory, and me cocksure waiting at the gates. She cracks a tired smile, slides one chafed hand into mine. The other holds a weighted plastic bag. She is much older and intoxicating. Her hair smells of the ocean. 2 minutes later, we're on the harbor's seawall, our legs dangling over granite. Scallops too small to make the cut laid out between us. She opens one, touches its muscular foot with her knife, watches it react and withdraw. That's what they all do, she says, before biting into the meat. Find in the grave, by her given name, wildflowers. So when I first submitted this to Roberta, I had a different haiku, and she said to me that haiku doesn't work. Find another one. And I tried a few, and eventually landed on this. And it was like a light bulb in my writing, like a light bulb going off, because what this needed was a temporal shift. So if you have prose that ends with a big thump, one of the ways that you can get a lot out of the haiku is if you set it in a different time. And so the prose here is looking at a time in the past, and the haiku is much more in the present or near present when I'm going back to that place. And now I'm trying to find this woman who's dead, I think, because she was much older than me. And the only thing I know is her first name. And so that's the temporal shift that I think works with this particular one. But it's up to readers to say that, not me.
And do you think it's possible for Haibun or a regular poem to work without some kind of lift or sheet, leap or something like that? That different that setting, setting it in a different time or place or mental space or philosophical perspective, those leaps are so powerful. Is it possible? Like literally, is it even possible? Have you ever read one that you've loved that stayed in the same place? Because we see so many poems, submitted, and I want to talk more about, as an editor, your experience, but that's one of them. Do you ever find a poem that is it possible to work without having, leaps and movement like that?
There are poems that I like purely for sound. I will say that.
Mm-hmm.
Just the beauty of the rhythm and the sound, yes, of course. But one of the things that, and by the way, I wish I'd known now what I do after experiencing this with Haibun, because these leaps are obvious and you can see them and you can understand why they work. I wish I'd known that when I was writing, if you like, what I call conventional long form poetry, because looking back on it, even poems I had published, nothing happens. I mean, God knows why the editors took them. So in Haibun, a Writer's Guide, each of us made various contributions on certain things, but this one is from Roberta. She said, "We've got to say this. Something has to happen. Something has to happen in Haibun." And I think it's important. And I think really great, really great poems, contemporary poems, my favorite poems, yeah, they have a shift, significant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ted Kuza's, I think it's called Etude, which is about a heron, has this fantastic shift.
Hmm.
Uh, Two-thirds of the way through. Absolutely brilliant. Beautiful point.
Yeah, yeah, that reminds me. When I haven't thought of this, but maybe my first realization as a writer, before I'd ever written anything, I remember being like 5 or 6 years old and being really annoyed watching some movie that they weren't showing like the regular things that happen in their lives. You know, like that they ate a sandwich for breakfast and they did, whatever they did. Like, why are we only seeing? It's like it seems unfair that we're only seeing these dramatic moments. Then I realized, wait a minute, that's the stories worth telling. It's when something happens, and we wouldn't care to know what they had for breakfast. And I don't know. I mean, but then you do. It's true. You get all these poems sent in where the details are great and interesting, and then you're like, wait, well, nothing happened. Like, what was the point? What happened?
I know,
And
and you're reading them there, and you're just waiting, and you think it gotta come soon. Like, where is it? You
mhm.
know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Then you're like, oh, did I miss it? Then you go read back, and like, nope, nothing happened.
but I tell you what, Tim, when you get one that does come across, and all of a sudden it's there, it just makes your day, doesn't it?
Oh,
I
it
mean,
definitely does. Yeah, yeah. But it's strange how rare like everything clicking is. Like some things have these profound topics people are trying to get to the heart of, and they don't get quite there. And then so many are going through the motions and never
yeah,
finding anything that was worth sharing in the first place. And that's the vast majority of everything. Is that the vast majority of things you see too as an editor at Frogpond?
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so what is how has your experience there informed your writing? I'm sure that that process of seeing submissions, for somebody as thoughtful about mechanics as you, about how to make poems work, right? So has that something that's really helped your writing take off?
Yeah, I mean, it has, and so well. First of all, you read so many, and I think I mean, we get a very large number of submissions. And we publish 3 times a year. I'm co-editor with Judson Evans, who I'm hoping is listening in on this. And we get a large number. And I would say that a significant number just on first read just don't do it. But it's the ones that you go, wow. And then you have to ask yourself, why? What is it that's causing this visceral reaction in me? And that really helps because then you start to see oh, that's what she's doing, or that's what they're doing, and so that's great. The other thing is that I don't always do this, but I often write to poets and say, "Are you open to some suggestions?" Because I'm not quite there yet at the moment. Now, invariably, they come back and say yes. I think they probably regret it after that. But the to and fro with poets, um, I get a lot out of that, and I hope they do as well because I learn a lot myself.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on that thread too, but I want to do the rest of the three Haibun we have left. So let's do another Haibun, then we'll pick up on that. Also, I forgot to say when I was asking for questions to click the like button. Because as always, twice as many people are watching live as have clicked like so far. There you go, Dick Westheimer saying it right now. Yeah, twice as many. So click the like button if you haven't yet. That really helps. It puts poetry right on the sidebar for people who might be watching something else. So the ratio of watchers to likers is really important. So click the like button. All right, so let's do another poem. Next up is Aberfan, I think.
this is Abavan, and so this is the example I was talking about earlier of trying to find a way into if you like, the experience. So Aberfan was one of the great tragedies of the 20th century, certainly in Wales, and probably one of the great ones anyway. A coal tip next to a mine got saturated with water and flowed down as a slurry, and it engulfed a school. 116 children were buried and killed. The total number dead, including teachers, was 144. Um, the slurry itself was about 15 to 20 feet thick, and it took a long time to even extricate the bodies from it. It was it was a major trauma for the whole country, and I remember that, and I wanted to write about it. and I wasn't sure how I could get into it. And what happened was that there was a conversation. Somebody said, "Do you remember where you were when you heard of Aberfan?" And I remember thinking, I've heard that phrase before. Do you remember where you were when you heard that JFK was dead? I think many people would say that of my generation. And that gave me the idea that, well, maybe I can write some diary entries of moments that I remember from individual years. And these diary entries, by the way, these are monaku. We haven't talked about monaku. Monaku is single line haiku. And so I basically had the idea of just picking one moment from each of those years. And then for the last year, 1966, when Aberfan happened, I could talk about an experience that I had. So that's how I was able to enter the prose. So Aberfan, 1961, garbled words from space, my father back from the pub. 1962, click of a stopwatch, again last under the desk. 1963, nicking a Beano from the newsstand, JFK dead. 1964, Beatles land in New York, creeping downstairs. 1965, early hours of Phantom Punch in the first round. 1966, rumors throughout the school. Older boys picked up at the gates by fathers. Classes cancelled. Walking home through silent streets, our front door ajar. A note from Dad that he's gone to help, back in a couple of days. Grabbing an apple, cycling past the biscuit factory, into Roth, then Clinician, heading for Merthyr. A puncture in the dark, a chill in the air, a police car taking me home. The helplessness, the fear, the dark. Surfacing, my body picked clean by crows.
Yeah, so that's Aberfan. And really a wonderful format. And that's one of the things you do probably better than anybody I've ever seen, Lou, is to have new forms and new variations of ways to present poetry. And the one wonderful thing about Haibun too is since you have those cuts and those jumps, there's like different pieces. And by having like discrete pieces that you can move around, that allows you to play in really different ways. Somebody mentioned already on a tear. I can't. Where was the comment on that? It was Judson Evans who said, "I'm always fascinated by the way some of your Haibun shift from the verbal to the visual." Is how he put it, which is a great way. Like you're on a tear, the Haibun becomes a bit like concrete poetry. Judson was asking how that happens for you, but it's really fascinating to the way, because there are these different units that you can move them around and do. The problem with experimental poetry so often is that it takes you out of the moment of the poem. To have these weird leaps or visual, concrete poetry, like if it's shaped like a duck, like who kind of cares if it's shaped like a duck? It's like a distraction usually. But with haiku or haibun, you have all these different parts, and the way that you put these parts can be so different. But in the meantime, but answer for Judson, how do you come to those surprising leaps like this, which was you said you wrestled with this for a long time, figuring out the timeline of monoku is the way to go, or on a tear, which is, for those who haven't read it, that was from the fall issue of Rattle. And that's the haiku is written on sort of tear sheets, like the whole thing is a flyer, and you would pull off one word at a time. So how is it that you come up with those? How does that happen for you, as Judson says?
Well, first of all, I paid Judson to say that. I just want to tell you that. So, hi, Judson. um, well, in that particular case in Aberfan, I was searching for a way to get in, and I then came up with that, if you like, that structure. And the key thing about that is that the structure is working for me. So whatever you do, the structure has to work for you. So if I do something that's very concrete, I don't want any gimmicks. So I did one we didn't talk about, Tim, on the conversation. I did one um, where the subject matter was that and I think many people look at things in our past through rose-tinted glasses. Okay. And so I started with a haiku, in this case, of rose tinted. And I thought, what do I know that's rose tinted? And I thought, well, all kinds of things, etc. But I ended up picking on Betelgeuse, the star. And I thought, well, that's interesting because when I'm looking at Betelgeuse, I'm looking into the past because that light has taken a long time to get to me. So there I am looking at a rose-tinted star in the past. So I decided that I would look at that through a telescope. And I created text, which was circular, where the outer text presented a rosy picture of something in the past. The next layer in changed a couple of words so it wasn't so rosy. The next layer in more words. And so this final little circle in the middle told the truth of what was happening in the past. And that was harrowing. And that was, as it happens, that was true. So there, if you like, it was going from, okay, rose-tinted glasses, etc. And then if you like, how can I get to that? Well, I look into the past through a telescope. So I will always search for a concrete solution to a particular thing that I'm trying to illuminate. I won't come out with a concrete structure first and then try and write the poem, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's so interesting. I mean, like looking at what tool you would need to solve this problem. That's a really great way of thinking about it. Let's see. Well, we have two Haibun left. Why don't you read the shipping forecast? And there's some great questions. I'm going to get to a couple more great questions, but let's do the shipping forecast next.
Okay, so the shipping forecast, if you're not from the UK, you probably don't know, but this is an institution in the UK. It occurs in the early morning hours. Many people lull themselves to sleep listening to this. It's usually a voice that's reciting the names of weather stations. Some are lightships, some are areas. And it's almost poetic in the way that these things are just recited out and what the weather conditions are using code. It's become so famous that if you go on YouTube and you can see the number of hits on various classic recordings of the shipping forecast. So that's what this one is about. And you'll see the time, which is at just before 1 o'clock in the morning, features in this poem. This is, by the way, I'll say it up front. This is an example where there is no final haiku. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, there's an introductory haiku. The reason for that is because the prose ends with a mega wallop. And it would be almost impossible to put a haiku after that. So this is the scene set in haiku to start. The shipping forecast, old skiff, an extra oarlock for the bottle. There are warnings of gales in Thames and White. Never went to war. Had to stay back, he said. Surfacing Spitfires and hurricanes. Digs above a pub. Couple of pints each night, then up to bed and the radio. Girls would turn up on weekends, searching for pilots and silk stockings. Fair Isle, Fitzroy, Forth. Never enough glamour boys, though, and fewer each week, made for a lonely girl or two. Past closing time, picking at threads. Fancy a cutch upstairs, and some did. Lundy, Shannon, Tyne. Talk to them of home, softly with a lilt, waiting down the clock to 0048. Then tuning in long wave. Didn't take 'em long to lie down, listen to the names. Melted like butter, he said. Bailey, Biscay, Soul. Then he met you, and the storms began.
Yeah, I mean that last line is a wallop of a great. It would be a great last line in a poem without the haiku included in it. And so, yeah, we definitely see what you mean. I think, Lew. Let's see. So there are a bunch of great questions. Where to go? Daria Montiero wants to ask: when you make a true jump in a poem, it is unavoidable that some of your readers won't make it to the other side with you. How many are you willing to leave behind for a good jump? 80%? So that's a great question because it's true. You know, I mean, not everybody's gonna be able to follow, and people ask that all the time. You know, how much of this do I need to explain? Is there a way that you think about how much you have to help with the jump?
Well, yeah. So I'm trying not to mention names of poets who I just cannot understand, but some British poets recently deceased I never could understand. But with my Haibun, I mean, I try and make the leaps so that I would say most people can get it. You may have to work a little bit, but and now it's up to the readers to say whether that's the case, and you're gonna have loads of people piling in saying, "Tell Lou I can't understand this one or that one or that one." But I do try very hard for it. But I've got a little trick that I use, and so you know that I said that. So the way the title works in many cases, not the shipping forecast because that's a statement, but in things like deposition, for instance, or the fairest one. The way it works is that there has to be a link, if you like, in retrospect with the prose and with the haiku. Okay. And you really want to, by the time you've read both of those and you look back again at that title, you go, oh, wow, that's what it means, the title. So if you find that you cannot come out with a title that does that,
Hmm.
that is able to bridge across the haiku and the prose, then it's a sign that the haiku has leapt too far.
Hmm.
And I use that as a test for myself. I'm like if I've been trying to get a title for 2 weeks and I'm virtually stabbing myself in the neck with my pen, then I go, well, hang on a second. Let's look at this haiku. Has it gone too far? And invariably it has. And so I'll pull it back in a bit.
Hmm.
So I would say I would like to hope it's over 90%
Yeah.
to the number.
Or at least 90% of the people who try. I think trying is an important part of it. Um,
Yeah.
there's a question from Chelsea McClellan. I know you're not the with modern haiku, but it is an interesting question, and the haiku community is so sort of close knit and open, and you talk about things amongst each other. Chelsea says on the modern haiku website, it says good haiku avoid displays of intellect, wit, and facility with words. I haven't been able to grasp what that might look like. Could you elaborate? Do you have any idea what Paul or whoever was talking about when he wrote that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I don't know whether it was Paul who wrote that. He'd have to own it, wouldn't he? Or whether it was written by one of the previous editors. But there is this idea that simple language um, used in a sparing way and an insightful way can be incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem that you get with using, if you like, sort of obscure or fancy words and phrases is it's doing too much work. It's explaining too much. And I think maybe that's what he's trying to get at there. There are some people, there are many people who believe, for instance, that really, really good haiku in English language don't have verbs.
Hmm.
Because why would you? I mean, you certainly don't want an adverb. Let's put that out there, ever. But why would you need a verb if you have, if you like, the nouns and working in the way they should? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what they're trying to get at simplicity.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And one more thing I wanted to talk about is you really interestingly have taken and described in the last interview and some here some great advice you've taken from other writers and editors. And that's always a question. How do you know when to take advice and when not to? Like, there's the issue of like taking nobody's advice and thinking, oh, my poetry is pure and I will not take any suggestions from anybody. I mean, and that's a false road to go down. But then there's the other problem on the other side of taking everybody's advice and thinking they know what to do for you, when it's what's worked for them. So how do you navigate that and figure out who to take advice from, since you're really good at taking advice?
Well, I think the very first thing is how much you respect the editor as a poet in their own right. So the two examples that I gave, and there's many more, but Roberta Beary is a superb Haibun poet, and a shout out by the way, she's got a new book out called Crazy Bitches, which is tremendous. I think Katie wrote a blurb for it, and I did too.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean,
But
we read that book together a little bit, and that's an
yeah,
amazing book. So everybody should check it
so,
out. Yeah.
so if Roberta gets back to me and says, "Hey, this almost works," are you open to suggestions? And you say, "Well, yeah," because you know it's going to be really good. And some of them, I must admit, some of the things, some of the times with Roberta, I've sort of scratched my head and saying, "Bloody hell, why didn't I pick that up? How the hell did I?" And the other one is Rich Youmans, who's the editor of Contemporary Haibun Online. I would give a shout out to that actually. If people want to get into contemporary Haibun and they want to see a large amount of material and a superb archives, Contemporary Haibun Online is way up there. It's tremendous. Really great archives as well. And so, people like that. So the first thing is how much you respect them. And the second is you know, you go, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I did have one that sticks out, and I'm not going to mention the name, but I put two or three Hyben in as a submission, and I got a flat rejection, which is fine. But the editor at the time, and it was a guest editor, came back and took issue with one of them and said, and by the way, if you ever submit this elsewhere, I think you need to change your tone and this, that, and the other.
Hmm.
Anyway, I thought, well, hang on, I didn't write it that way, and I don't think it reads that way. And so what I did was I sort of licked my wounds and submitted it again. And anyway, it ended up winning an award. So
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so much advice is bad advice. Like you see it all the time, and so and I don't really know how. Like you said, how much you respect the person who's giving you the advice is such an important part. But it's hard to
yeah,
navigate. You know, who to respect and who not to. So it's always an interesting question. Well, we're really, I mean, you've gone longer than promised, and I really appreciate that, Lou. It's so fun talking to you. Let's finish up with this one last Hyben, and it's a wonderful one. It has a visual art component and a whole lot going on in it. Do you want to share your spatial concept waiting?
yeah, sure. So have we got the image up at the moment of the work of art?
Yep, it's right here. This piece. Hmm.
Yeah, so this is spatial concept weighting, it's called. Interestingly, um, and that's the title of the poem. The word waiting, um, I only realized how important that was to my poem after I finished writing it. And you'll see that later on. But basically, it's by Lucio Fontana. This particular one is in the Tate Gallery in London, which was the first time I saw it. And he started slashing his canvases and initially using knives and then later using all kinds of implements. This Haibun was the essence behind it is that I used to go and see this quite often, and I went once with a girlfriend, and so I've written about that. Separately, I had a girlfriend who I lost touch with, and I found out, and I knew that she was unfortunately she was cutting herself. And so when I thought about both of those and I thought about spatial concept weighting, I decided that I would interweave those into a poem. And what I decided to do, and I don't know whether you've got the text up there now, Tim, is I decided I would also slash the text. And so I suppose you could say it's ekphrastic, but not in the normal way of being ekphrastic. So I'll read it and then we can talk about it maybe. Spatial concept weighting. The first time I saw it was at the Tate, and I was with you for the first time. You were so young and beautiful, and your skin was perfect then. When you asked me to go with you, I bought some books from the Salvation Army, the kind with lots of photos, so I didn't come across as some kind of dick or stupid. Even recognized a few paintings before reading the label. Each time I said an artist's name, you'd turn and smile, even if I got it wrong, made me sometimes wish I'd stitched my mouth shut. And then suddenly it was hanging alone on a white wall, the beige canvas slashed. I could almost hear the right arm stabbing, then dragging the blade down and across, though later things moved on to multiple wounds and different tools, bare hands, nails, chisels, even screwdrivers. By then, I'd lost track of you after the first scars appeared. Your way of cutting off an older, deeper pain, you said, I'm here, lost, lost, you lost. Old prison cell, the final tally mark, the deepest.
Yeah, I mean, so much going on in that Haibun, with the slash, with so much in the prose, and then such a big leap too to an old prison cell. And so what else can you tell us about this, Lew?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that I didn't go to the gallery with the young woman who cut herself. Those were two different people. But like Roberta says, and she's taken this from Emily Dickinson, tell it slant. So the fact is, it's authentic, although it's not totally true. And so, yeah, I mean, it's. I obviously felt very, very strongly about it. And funny enough, um, even though that particular girl and I lost touch with her totally, was cutting herself, I had people in my family that were cutting themselves, and so it had a personal thing. And maybe that comes back to what one of the questions were. That was something I would not write about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example. And I wanted to write about it in a way that it would bring it to life, and I wanted to have the poem slashed. So that's what we did. The haiku itself actually is a big leap, and that's from some of the slave prison in West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So where they were having tally marks on the wall, and they used to sometimes make the tally marks with their nails as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a powerful poem on so many levels, and there's really so much going on in it. It's one of the most compact poems I've seen. And we're going to let you go. One more thing I wanted to ask about and talk about a little bit. I think it was Dick Westheimer, if I could find the comment again, asked about other places publishing Haibun besides for, like we have Frogpond, we have Contemporary Haibun Online, we have Modern Haiku. So haiku-oriented places and Haibun-focused places. There's an entire world of haiku poetry that sort of runs parallel to traditional or mainstream poetry. So where are some places that publish Haibun maybe that you wouldn't expect? Like, have you had any luck? Like spatial concept waiting, should be pushcart prize, like Best American Poetry type. I don't know if they've ever published haiku in Best American Poetry, to my knowledge. Do you have any sort of mainstream literary magazines that appreciate and understand Haibun? I mean, it's hard enough to get them to think haiku are not 17 syllables. And so, are there any that are open to Haibun, or do you have any? Because it's such a fascinating and mind expanding form. Have you had any luck outside of the haiku community besides for Rattle, who loves Haibun and haiku?
No, I haven't actually. I mean, don't laugh at me, but I did submit one quite some time ago to the New Yorker. And it was when I was in my early days of writing Haibun, and I thought this one was the best thing since sliced bread. So I sent it off, and I was devastated when I think it was about a year and a half later I got a reply saying no, and didn't have the guts to. No, I mean I think Rattle was the first I've submitted to outside of that, but I mean I can tell you, I mean if people are writing down like places, really good places to search. Now, my editor friends are going to kill me if I forget any of them, but the ones that only do Haibun, there's the Haibun Journal, which is based out of Ireland, and the editor there is Sean O'Connor. That's a hard copy journal, comes out 3 times a year, I think, or maybe twice. And so Drifting Sands Haibun is online. That only does Haibun, and Contemporary Haibun Online.
Mm-hmm.
That only does Haibun. When I say only does Haibun, they do tanka prose as well.
Mm-hmm.
Frogpond, Modern Haiku. There's a UK journal called Presence. There's a superb journal in India. There's a lot of Haibun poets in India, by the way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that and some really beautiful work coming out of there. Haiku Katha, that's called. You could look
Yeah.
that up.
Well, so some folks in the chat are mentioning, let's see, Drifting Sands, McQueen's Quinterly, which publishes a lot of traditional poetry. You know, they published Roberta's book, as somebody pointed out, the Crazy Bitches, which just came out. Dick Westhart mentions also Only Poems has done good. Haiku and Haibun, and of course, like One Art. Katie's, of course, editing that One Art Haiku anthology. That's one, and maybe he would be open to Haibun. I haven't seen any directly there. Judson Evans mentions, he says, Haibun is now very much popular in the mainstream contemporary poetry world, influenced by the burning Haibun of Torrin Greathouse. And I don't know if we can even talk about that, because I don't think that's a Haibun at all. So there's that issue. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Lou, but it's an erasure that ends on a 17-syllable mono, like a micro poem that's not actually haiku. And so I think it's a great concept that doesn't actually capture Haibun, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. So it's a good example, though. The burning Haibun is maybe you could introduce good Haibun to people who are familiar with burning Haibun, and that could be a door in, maybe. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to come on to McQueen's because Claire McQueen does a fantastic job there, and she's just published two of mine last week, and then I've got two more coming up in the future. But she's one, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this. She has an amazing ability, an amazing eye. If you submit something to her and she takes something, then you wake up the next morning and you go, yeah, that was the best thing I sent. And, you know, I mean, she really does.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't come back with editorial comments.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very rarely. Some typos, etc., etc. So she leaves the poet alone.
Yeah, well, that's my philosophy too, actually, because I think if you've gone through the gauntlet of, the 500 poems a day we get, then I trust you to be better as a writer than me. so you can have your way with it, unless there's some obvious glaring mistake. But yeah.
But I would say if there's any editors out there in the mainstream world that would like to publish more Haibun, I'd love to hear about it. And I'm sure if or when we do a second edition of Haibun, a Writer's Guide, because we have a big resources section at the back, we'd like to see more mainstream journals publishing Haibun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And of course, if you can always look at the back of a book like Eira and see where they've been published, and those are all places that publish great Haibun, so that's how you know too. All right, well, thanks so much, Lou. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. It was so much fun talking last time. Every time I get to talk, it's great. So glad to see you, glad to be here, and thanks for sharing these great Haibun with us.
That was a pleasure. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so once again, that was Lew Watts, his most recent book of Haibun. Of course, he's got the Haibun, the Writer's Guide, which you should pick up. He wrote with Rich Youmans and Roberta Beary, who are also in our Haibun issue of Rattle. You've also got his book, Eira, and if you want to find that, you can just go to the press's website. That's the best place to go, snapshotpress.co.uk, and you can find Lew's book there. Again, winner of a Touchstone Award for one of the best books in the haiku world that year, and definitely have to agree with that selection. So find all of Lew Watts wherever you can. And there's a lot in the Haiku Foundation, too. That recent issue of Rattle, all over the place. So check out more if you would. And we're going to take a quick break and go to our prompt lines. And the prompt for this week is write a poem about a specific type of phobia you do not personally have, but know of someone that does. Okay, that's your prompt. Write about a phobia, but not one that you have, but that someone else does. And of course, it's going to be a little sensitive writing about other people's phobias, but that pressure might come out in some interesting ways. So let's see what everybody does with that. Now, how it works is if you'd like to share a poem, all you have to do is email it first to promptlines@rattle.com. That's promptlines, all one word, @rattle.com. That way I can show the poem on the screen like you've been seeing already. And then I'm going to post the Zoom link in the chat windows on YouTube or Facebook. So if you're watching someone else, you got to find YouTube or Facebook, but go there, join the Zoom, and then you can share your poem after emailing it to me. That's how it's going to work, only if you have a poem about the current prompt. It's this week's prompt only. Also, it's a 1-page max and a 3-minute max time on camera for everybody. So if you've got a really short poem, feel free to chat a little, talk it up, introduce it. If it's a longer poem, even if it's on 1 page, let's jump right in because we want to make sure we have enough time for everybody and we get to eat dinner while it's still today. So please do that and be conscious and courteous of other people. But we love your poems, so please do join the Zoom if you've got one to share. If you don't have one to share, all you have to do is sit right where you are, because we'll be back in just a second. The best place to watch is that YouTube or Facebook or X or wherever. So just sit tight and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. We've got our prompt poems editor, associate editor, and my wife, Katie Dozier, here with us to share some prompt poems. Hey, Katie.
Hey, I gotta admit, I was kind of tempted to not show up and see if you just keep talking to Lew Watts, because I was really, really enjoying that.
Yeah, well, you got to end sometime. But
I guess so. I took so much from that interview. I loved it. I also think it's so interesting how all the specific Haibun advice, it just applies to all poetry, right? Mm-hmm. You can just take that and run with it, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, it's really like a scaffold for what you want any poem to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like stripped of the hiding the trail, and the trail is like right there, and you can just jump in. Which is why, we love the form so much. And, you write more Haibun than I do, of course.
Well, that's about not to be true, because we're about to write another book of Haibun together next month.
Dive in. Of course, we have the Hot Pink Moon book that we did last April. And I guess apparently we're saying it that we're going to do it again.
We're going to start in only a couple days.
A couple of days is April 1st. So let's see what we've got here.
We're not fooling.
Not fooling. Okay, so the prompt, like I said, was write a poem about a specific type of phobia you do not personally have, but know someone that does. So that's your prompt. What did you come up with, Katie?
First, I want to say I retitled this poem very recently, in part because I was thinking, why do Haibun have to have all the fun? I want all my titles to have cuts between them, even if they're not a Haibun. So I changed this up. But I see you got the correct poem in time, so way to go for you.
Okay.
All right. Break room. See, there are two kinds of people. The first looks at a Fabergé egg or a hilltop awash in irises or child and marvels at all the inlaid sapphires. Then there are those that, when presented with such twinkling anomalies, can only think of their need to throw the glowing egg, to explode the yolks on the wall, to stomp through the irises, to break their green necks. Such people must dream of peddling the petals. And back to the child. I suppose the thought is not as sudden as the urge to smash an egg, more the whisper of a white balloon deflating. Won't you just calm down? The gale administered any time they sense their enemy, needless elation. So the phobia that I was writing about was cheerophobia, which is a fear of happiness that I definitely do not have, but have known people, I think, that have it, and it seems like it would be extremely crippling. So
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, great metaphors in that poem, the break room.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Katie. And we won't reveal who we're talking about. Is there a specific person you're supposed to be talking about? I guess it is, right? But
I guess you should have the person in mind, but I think Lew Watts covered that well in the interview too. No need to call people out directly, but try to take inspiration from not being what you don't want to be, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's what made it an interesting prompt, I think, is not your own phobia, but someone else's, and trying to have that empathy, So this is mine, just social phobia, which I try to look up, like fear of being judged as a phobia, and it turns out that's just social anxiety disorder, and there's not like a specific, sometimes they call it social phobia. There's something called like criticophobia with a lot of K's.
Well, that's a fun one.
But that's not actually a real one. That's just something that, like, if you're forced to make like a high phobiaization of that.
Oh, okay.
But really it's just social phobia. So anyway, so that's what I was playing with here, and this is a short little poem. Social phobia. It's not the fear of being seen, but seeing that you might be seen in all the ways you've been seeing yourself. That's the knot that won't unknot, and it's not that you aren't aware. That twist of hair is as hard as stone when pressed between your fingertips. That lip alone is all you've got. A very short poem, social phobia. So let's see what everybody else has. I'm interested in, I have you had phobias? You think?
I really, like, anytime, honestly, I identified anything, like I was getting a little too afraid of, I got more afraid of snakes after Charlotte was bit by a snake, but I was always didn't like snakes. So I feel like, no, not so much.
Yeah, I always wonder about that, because I don't like snakes. But like, and I don't like spiders. But then to actually think about it in terms of phobia, like when I was like a kid, I would say, "Oh, I've got arachnophobia," because that movie came out, And no, they kind of creeped me out. But
I had tornado phobia because of Twister. I sat in the first row when I was like way too little to do that in a movie theater long, and that's another story.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested to hear what everybody else has.
Yeah, it's an interesting prompt. So let's see what everybody has. Let's go first to Hamid Malik.
Oh, okay. How are you?
Hey, Hamid, great to see you.
You too. Okay, I'll get straight into mine. Wasn't expecting so quickly. How crossed scissors cut. My mother, though she's good at math, fears the number 4, a dread bestowed on her by Kim, her friend from Vietnam. Tetraphobia, leaping from the Asian world, roams lost through mum's born in Egypt brain, jostling for room amongst bloated superstitions of warding off a hex with an evil eye medallion, keeping shoes right side up to not offend the gods, and ensuring peace in families by storing scissors closed. How sadistic the spirits of the dead, always watching what we do, goading us to twist to their commands, then laughing at their game of Simon Says. Though they toss good fortune in for fun, you'll find some luck if a bird poops on your head. There's something weirdly comforting about a people sharing myth, cowering together against the gods, superstition morphing phobic and lurching through the streets, the homes, the barbershops. A whole country with its scissors closed, shoes lined up like loaves of bread, and crowds beneath great flocks of well-fed birds. But back to tetraphobia. Tetra because we're friends. Wildly gesturing from my mum to move the party to a different date, place another peach into the bag of 4 at Coles, and the car you thought was such a find must be let go for its wretched number plate. Never mind my sister who called to say they'd finally found a house to buy, then stuttered over number 46. But Mum, 4 plus 6 is 10, which then is 1, so that's okay, correct? But no, numerology's a knave in the court of Tyrant 4. I did my part, removed a chair from the square table where we ate, set down 3 plates that first night without their dad while Tetra watched. He doesn't eat, just hovers there, counting in my head the numbers fate allows for all the times I've left my scissors crossed.
Wow, I love that ending, Hannah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Yeah, very rich
Thank you.
poem. Yeah.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much for sharing
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, that was Hammett Malik with How Crossed Scissors Cut. Yeah, really fascinating. And I never heard of that either, the tetraphobia.
Yeah.
Let's go next to Amanda Harris.
Thank you, guys. So this prompt was a little more difficult for me, and I ended up going with agoraphobia, which is something I had heard about on my 600-pound life. Agoraphobia. My backyard is a fanged elephant. I have roughhoused with its trunks and then called its trunks the continent I could not summon home. Fingers do strange magic. Their ideas of outside gnaw at the spine of peace. I cannot sleep. I cannot think. Somewhere a speck of dust whispers, leave, leave. Leaving, I say to myself, is a sick act meant for nomads. The radio hisses at me, realizing I only smile at what I think is home.
Yeah, a great last line too.
Yeah,
I
and
love
a great entry. You always have such strong entries. We just dive right in. Yeah.
We do, and then we get a little leap, and then and the poem moves. Thanks for sharing that, Amanda.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Yep, that was Amanda Harris with agoraphobia. Let's go to Dick Westheimer next.
Hey, all.
Hey, Dick, great to see you.
I know a lot of folks loved that interview, but I think the thing that I loved about it most was hearing you, Tim, like explore territory you hadn't explored before. That's a really feature of Rattlecast interviews that I really love.
Well, it's fun. Always trying, but with 187 episodes or 287.
Yeah, it was always great because Lew Watts was going to be willing to go there and explore with you and everything, and that's part of what makes him such a great poet too, of course.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Sure. So my phobia, for want of a better term, I think they call it omniphobia or panphobia, fear of just about everything. So the great god Phobos contends with mother love. And the epigraph is from Ursula K. Le Guin, light is the left hand of darkness and darkness the right hand of light. She is afraid of so much. Continental drift, the corona of the sun, the season's sudden shift from summer to fall. But most of all, extraordinary rendition of her only child who is yet to turn 1. The news of students disappeared has taken all her fears and mixed them into a single bolus of heaving breath, this devil's choir inside her chest. We live in a new nation where such things are true. No one can escape from dismay. The citadel of fear is defended by a bot army of TikToks and memes and late-night comedians, by the device adhered to the left hand of our darkest thoughts. The toddling child lets go of his mother's hand and bends to pick up a lichen-covered rock, which he turns over in his hand and licks. He giggles like one who has just tasted salt. The tectonic shift his mother feels from Phobos to hope shakes the whole world for a moment, an intake of breath from winter to spring, from frost to thaw, from rumination to awe.
Yeah, I love the closing rhyme there.
Yeah, great music there. It was also interesting because you said one part slightly different, and I realized it was an edit for music because what was actually said, it was much more musical. So that was interesting too, if I'm allowed to call you out in a minor way.
Yeah.
You can call me out. And the second one was that I did summer to fall while in the printed issue. The printed version you have very early on, it says from winter to spring.
Yes, that's what I noticed.
Okay, that was the
Yeah.
one. There's also to not too much mirror the shift in seasons at the end. But what an arduous week trying to figure out what phobias I don't have because I got a ton of them.
Yeah, it was a real tough prompt in that, a real challenge to think, really, to think about other people in a different way, and try to figure it out. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and try to understand them. Try to understand that experience and how real and traumatic that is for them.
Yeah, yeah. Great lesson in empathy this week. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dick.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Dick Westheimer with the great god Phobos contends with mother love. Next, let's go to Mike Bales.
Oh, surprise tonight. I've got a Haibun.
Oh,
Nice.
great timing, Mike. Yeah, like you planned it that way.
It's like I was thinking of, geez, I had to write one. Can I write one and all this? And I wrote one. I don't know what you call this. I know someone who's had troubles and afraid of the troubles. It's almost like fear of fear, this kind of thing I've heard from another person. As a, from maybe some of my great studies in college, I'd want to help someone, but when you fear, it's kind of hard to do to help someone with that.
Oh, hey, Mike, I was gonna mention
There might be a name for it.
Uh-huh. I was gonna mention when you move your head kind of to the side, it gets really quiet. So keep somehow if you read, that's happened the last couple of weeks. So make sure you
Right in front.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Fear breakdowns.
perfect.
The sun is shining, but he keeps his bedroom door locked. He says that he hasn't been able to sleep. He said that he wasn't able to sleep when he was with his wife who lives in Indonesia. He'd forgotten his meds. His mother lent him money to come, his grandfather lent him money to come back home. He says he shouldn't have bought the house after I already moved in. He confesses he married young and he doesn't know what to do with his life. He rocks back and forth while watching television, then goes back to bed. He says everything he does is wrong. He has stopped playing online war games with friends. His grandmother filled his refrigerator with food, but he doesn't eat, but maybe later. He says something's wrong with his brain. He hasn't gone anywhere today, but the sun shines through the window. Two restless cats wander through the cluttered living room. He says he will return to the job he had last year and it will be spring. He says he isn't ready. Bare limbs outside, wave in a breeze, a man cast in shadows.
Yeah, really heart-wrenching poem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And way to capture that, and then the empathy coming through, fear of breakdowns. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mike.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, that was Mike Bales with Fear of Breakdowns. Next, let's go to Chelsea McClellan.
Hello.
Hey, Chelsea.
Excuse me. Well, I could not find a phobia to explore of somebody else's. Which feels unfortunate, but it did prompt me in this direction. And I will say the you in this poem is no one in this room, or I highly doubt it is.
Okay.
And there is a second phobia at the end of well, you'll find out.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it's called Dear Phobe. I can't even say it. Dear Phobophobe. With an epigraph, phobophobia is an intense fear of being afraid. Some people might be terrified of the physical symptoms. Others are scared of developing another phobic disorder. And that comes from the Cleveland Clinic. Dear phobophobe, the DSM tells me the fear's excessive. The chance of mites today is extremely low. Unlike in a cheese cave, here you can expect the dust to settle and sit still. You shouldn't roll your window down in winter, hold your breath too long, or breathe too quick. Bridges really don't collapse as often as you think. And the breathing does get easier the more that you expect it. Don't you feel your airspace growing smaller when the crop duster shakes your house and you can't pay enough to make it stop? The doctor reassures me nothing's wrong, that MS isn't known to be genetic. But I still skip the ads, can't empathize for long. Stare at every speck I find in case it moves. Pack up my kids and leave the house when planes approach the neighbors' fields. Run into you at the coffee shop, reclined on the only couch, sipping your hot chocolate. You were laughing with your friends about these silly fears with names you can't pronounce. I almost threw a scathing look your way until I took a breath and realized we both might be considered phobophobes. I guess that mine's type 1 and yours type 2, the kind so unaccustomed to these fears. You also fear the fear itself and cope by turning phobias into a joke.
Yeah, that's a really interesting look at that. That was phobophobe. And yeah, a really interesting take on that, Chelsea. Yeah, cool poem. Yeah, it was Chelsea McClellan with
Thank you.
Dear Phobophobe.
I was trying to avoid saying the title because I knew I couldn't say it also.
Well, it's hard to say all these, really.
Phobophobe. I did it.
Yeah. Good job.
I'm not afraid of it.
You're not afraid of phobophobe. I wonder, is there a fear of cold reading poems?
I have that.
I must read them ahead of time.
I must read them ahead of time.
All right, let's go to Megan McDonald next. Oh, got to unmute still, Megan. It's not. Let's see. Okay. There you go. Hello. Great to see you, Megan. It's been a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I didn't realize there's two, ornithobia and peternophobia, which is fear of feathers, which is really closer to what it is. So this is another one for my grandmother.
Interesting.
Not to entangle. A new will, a new destiny to entangle. Memories, life, frozen, and recall becoming a totem of my childhood. Wings almost flutter, recall of terrible figures of feathers, a lot of terror to unravel. My grandmother had, to my childhood mind, an unreasonable fear of feathers. We couldn't watch the movie Birds. At the zoo, when I wanted to see the parrot show, Mom took me while Grandma, Dad, and Mickey went to see something else. Years later, Mom explained the reason for the feathers. My grandmother and my great-aunt were locked into closets with a feather tied on the door of the closet. My great-grandmother would tell them if they came out of the closet before she released them, the bird that had had the feather taken would peck their eyes out. A knot to untangle. Memories, a totem to recall. In downsizing jewelry, earrings, I handled the first pair of earrings I ever owned that wasn't a gift. I bought a pair of laurel birch enamel peacock earrings as a gift for my sister and fell deeply in love with the color turquoise and those earrings. After young logic and thinking, I kept the earrings and bought my sister a pair of beautiful golden brown wood doves, also laurel birch. I fell in love with her designs. I owned sweepwear, t-shirts, journals, and a painted tin container with laurel birch designs. Now in my downsizing, I handle the peacock feathers and the wood doves that my niece gave to me after my sister's passing. I can't bring myself to wear either pair, but they survived the downsizing purge. Is downsizing a knot to untangle? Am I holding it together with writing, reading, and learning how to handle downtime with retirement? Better, I think, than my college friend. It almost seems like I'm dealing with a husband or wife after retirement, and there is downtime. She's calling me often for long talks about how I handled retirement. I explained we're different. She's always on the go, always being active, and doesn't understand writing is being active. It's just a poem. Can't you come and shop? It's just a writing session. Do you have to do it today? I have free time, so let's go and eat and shop and walk and talk. It's a knot that's entangled, waiting to be untangled, and I need the maze of ekphrastic art as part of my maze of my life. I can walk into the woods with designs, pick irises of Van Gogh, always brilliant purple and periwinkle. I need to look inward and breathe outward the words of the day. A river is a body of water that doesn't need to be untangled. It's an ever-flowing, ever-changing river packed with twists and turns that moves from source to oceans to other bodies of waters that can engulf the water flowing down. Water is meditation. Connections are flow to words on my mind's pages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, beautiful. Haibun there. Thanks so much for that. And not to entangle. And yeah, great details throughout that, Megan. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Megan McDonald with a not to entangle. Let's go to Sean Evaningo Sanders next.
Hi, Jim and Katie.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean. Great to see you.
So I had a friend in college who I think had this. It's atelophobia, which is the fear of things not being perfect, which is like a really extreme case of being a perfection.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
So, but I have to say, this poem is not about her.
Okay.
Just borrowed the phobia from her. An American Karen has atelophobia. The more perfect you try to make something, the more obvious it becomes that you failed. I probably saw this on a bumper sticker or maybe tucked inside a fortune cookie. I think about this at Costco, watching a woman in a climate-controlled room where she picks out a carton of eggs and places it in the child seat of her shopping cart, and then proceeds to open 4 other egg cartons to swap out small runts of the litter eggs for bigger, better eggs, until her carton is the most perfect, beautiful carton of eggs that ever existed in the world history of grocery shopping. I can't help but wonder if after she unloads that carton of perfect eggs onto that conveyor belt where it can be scanned, paid for, and put into a recycled box to take out to her new Tesla, to be driven home in the rain and carried inside to a kitchen and placed upon a freshly cleaned, pristine refrigerated glass shelf. If by chance, come this Saturday while she gathers eggs to make frittata for her family, she will discover that one of the eggs is cracked and stuck in its yolk to the carton, which she then throws into the trash. Will she ask herself if all this nonsense, taking up space and wasting everyone else's time, those who were there at Costco to buy eggs for their families too, was even worth her effort? Is her life any more perfect than it was last week? I imagine her writing a letter to the manager of her local Costco to inform them how their inferior egg cartons have failed to protect her precious eggs to the level of her satisfaction. Maybe she will hand-deliver the letter to the store, believing she has made a real difference in the world. Meanwhile, somewhere in war-torn Gaza, there is a frightened little girl, walking among the rubble, calling out for her mother, starving and all alone.
Yeah. Well, beautiful poem, and I love the form, putting that into the shape of an egg with a crack in it.
Well, thank goodness it wasn't a duck.
That's true.
When you said that, this is the very first shape poem I've ever written, and when you said that, I was like, of course tonight.
But it works because it's on a different level, Sean, right? Your whole poem is about being perfect, and then what would the egg lady do? She would put her poem in the shape of an egg. So I think it works really well here.
Yeah, it definitely does.
It's a next level version. It's not a duck poem.
And I say duck because I made a poem in the shape of a duck once.
Now maybe that's next week's prompt.
Uh-oh. Careful what you've unleashed upon us.
Thank you, Sean.
As someone said, exceptional.
Who said that? I bet it was Jared Campbell.
It probably was, yeah. Oh, it was Audrey Friedman.
Audrey Friedman, well played. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Sean.
Thanks,
That was
Sean.
great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sean Evaningo Sanders with an American Karen has atelophobia.
Also, it makes me feel better for if I'm getting lettuce, I look through and find the best bag, but I definitely would never have thought to obsessively look for the individual best egg. So I feel better as a person after that poem.
All right, well, let's go next up. Let's go to Audrey Friedman. Why
Let's
not?
do. She's on a roll.
She is. Hey, Audrey, how you doing?
Good evening.
Yeah, great to see you.
This poem meanders a bit, but there is a phobia. There's more than one. Stakes. 1. I sat beside you in pre-op, and you showed me the metal rod they jabbed through your right breast. You told me not to be scared, that it wasn't nearly as bad as it looked. It reminded me of the silver stake I first saw thrust through a vampire heart on Zachary's Shock Theater. After that, I insisted Grandma watch the Transylvanian Host of Hosts with me each Saturday morning on her old black and white. For sure now, the surgeon can't miss that kind of target, you said, and went on to mock the cancer, naming it bullshit, trying to shrink it with a big attitude. 2. On the way to the poetry festival, we got off Route 95 at 4 a.m. in Connecticut. The sign said gas, but all we accomplished was to sweep a wide circle through the woods and sleeping streets with the needle on E. There is a healthy reserve below empty, you said. In the motel that night, you turned down the sheets. A spider with its 8 hairy filaments scuttled for cover, and you shrieked. I confessed that I never go into the snake house at the zoo. You admitted that a hypnotist's efforts had failed, and you won't travel anywhere you can't drive. 3, I was in the car with you when your cell phone rang. You pulled over and killed the engine in the rutted, puddly lot near the deserted summer fruit stand. I watched your stare fix on the splintery wood. Well, give it to me straight, Doc. Is it back? Will I be croaking anytime soon? You managed to falsetto laugh, and I kept telling myself, she's not going anywhere she can't drive to.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, what a great ending on that.
Definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Audrey.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, it was Audrey Friedman with Stakes.
Also, that poem made me realize I had a driving phobia for a long time, and I feel like saying I didn't have phobias earlier, I feel like I lied to everybody. So I need to come clean on that point.
Yeah, and to slowly creep back into
driving, and I actually like it now, but it was really hard for a while.
Yeah, it was always surprising to me though.
I know when I told you that. I know I'm aggressive in everything.
Yeah.
Now I'm
Just
aggressive in driving
back
too.
there again. Yep.
Yeah.
Just weaving out of traffic.
No, I'm not. I'm a safe driver. I'm a safe driver.
It's okay. All right. Well, let's go next to Nate Jacob. Hey, Nate, how you doing?
I'm good. How you been?
Hey.
Great, yeah.
Right on. Hey, I have one phobia personally. That is formal poetry. Just kidding. I actually wrote a sonnet about somebody who I know that has a fear of being forgotten someday. That is called my title that I practiced several times and still can't say right. Agoraphobia.
Well
Nicely done.
Well done,
yeah, well
sir.
played.
Thank you. Maybe I should quit there. There we go. Agoraphobia. Winter is gone the way all winters go, into the ground, battered and browned with need. The lawn and the garden beds longing so for tiller, for harrow, for rake and seed. The vole's dry lines will not green till late spring, run out from tree to fence like lightning burns, and in the corners where the dog keeps peeing, I forget, those tiny flowers return. 9 years back, a seed pack, a tiny thing, thrown to the wind, left on bare ground by a child, forgotten each year until flowering late spring, echoing to me those gone days, warm and mild, when I was not so old, and did not curse the cold, and did not worry I would ever be let go.
I love that story. You know, the flowers coming back up again and again.
Yeah,
beautifully done.
yeah, and it's very elegantly delivered with the wildflowers. You know, you just let us.
It's actually the old cliche without ever saying the words "forget-me-nots."
Aha, nice.
Interesting, yeah.
A magician never reveals his secrets, though, Nate. You know this.
Well, it's hardly magic. It's formal poetry. It's about children.
Yeah, well, that was great. Thanks so much for sharing.
I'm looking forward to Tim saying the name in 1 second, so we're just going to enjoy that when you say what poem it was.
All right.
I can't wait to hear it.
All the
Thanks.
pressure's on.
All right, well, thanks. That was Nate Jacob sharing his poem, Athazagoraphobia.
Oh,
yes.
Well, good job.
All right, let's go to Jared Campbell next.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey, Jared, great to see you.
Good to see you. So I had my wife's trypophobia, which is it's basically an aversion to patterns, clustered patterns of particularly holes, but it could also be bumps or other kind of marks.
Yeah, this is one I'd never heard of. Yeah, until we had a peacock cover of Rattle.
Oh, this is what I remember you talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and a whole bunch of people wrote and said, "Oh my God, I love Rattle, but I cannot look at your cover. I had to throw it away because I'm terrified of these holes in the peacock feathers." Yeah.
Yeah, certain birds that have dots all over them will set her off. Yeah. That's Okay. So my wife's trypophobia. What is it about a clustered set of holes that triggers itchy nausea? Doctors guess that it resembles skin disease to some long-established pre-med part of the brain. Doctors who often only see skin deep. But to only engage the surfaces of holes and not their invisible inner life is to ignore the holiness of holes. But it's also not the emptiness itself. It isn't terror of the cave, the womb, or terror of the anything or nothing, or else a single hole would set it off. It's terror of an ordered set of holes defined, divided by their walls. So is it fear of holes or fear of walls, or a disgust at empty repetitions, separated sameness, like freeway traffic or subdivision mansions, all alike and glowing with the possibility of life, but fenced and copy-pastable, sprawling like a skin disease, but mysterious with the empty mystery diseases had when cause was not an answer but a question, like those walls dividing consciousness that keep the things that make my wife and keep the things that make myself.
Yeah, very interesting place to go with that. Very surprising. My wife's tryptophobia, and the walls between everything. Yeah, really good leap in that into a philosophical conundrum. Thanks for sharing that, Jared.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Jared Campbell with my wife's trypophobia. Let's go to Zachary Honeycutt next. I think. Do we have audio on you, Zach? Not sure that we do, because it doesn't say I could mute him, which implies that audio is not available.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you might want to log out and come back in, Zach. I don't know what your audio is not turned on or something. We have video, though. Okay, yeah, we'll come back to you, Zach. Sorry. Let's go instead to Tina Denetclaw next. Hey, Tina.
I'm here.
Hi.
Hey, great to see you.
Great to see you guys too. So I think I'm getting more and more organized every time.
Nice.
So
Well done.
Thank you. So this is, and I don't know how to say it right. I've tried. Sideromorophobia is a fear of subways. And this is actually the first one I wrote. I read it to my little work group, and those ladies did not understand my poem. So I wrote another one where I really tried to describe what it feels like to have this. And that to a group I read poetry to last night, it just didn't go anywhere. I figured it out after listening to Lew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So here I am back to the stuff that other people don't understand, but that's nothing new. So here we go. I don't want to take the subway. My friend asked for an Uber. Across the bay? Yes. Why don't you want to take the subway? It's the subway. So much noise underground, I guess. Tourists from Europe were murdered just after leaving Del Norte BART and crossing the street to the sidewalk corner of a gas station. Later, someone was killed just feet from that corner, pumping gas into his car. That gas station closed 2 decades ago, and still it remains, now in disrepair. No one wants it. 3.6 miles, less than 5 minutes, for BART to speed under this bay to San Francisco. So little chance of an earthquake in those 5 minutes. The Loma Prieta earthquake broke the Bay Bridge, but didn't injure the Transbay Tube. So BART was the only way to commute for months. My God, so many people streaming down the curved stone steps and out of BART at the end of every day. A biology student swabbed a train's cloth seats and grew the smears in a petri dish, then told the Chronicle so we all would know for sure how filthy BART's fabric seats are. Placid quiet at 3 a.m. Underground in the Berkeley BART, my buzzing, tired head resting against my husband's back, waiting for a ride home after a long night with his fancy microscope. Polished walls and smooth floor, smooth and cool. Whispered whoosh and gentle pull of the air displaced by a distant train. We waited in the faithful subterrane, as if we were sitting in the slow pulsing vein below the sleeping city.
Great description there of the subway. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Tina.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the other things I had in the middle were things that truly are worth being afraid of. And nobody gets it. It's okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tina. Yeah, always a pleasure. That was Tina Deniclaw with I Don't Want to Take the Subway, a poem about siderodromophobia.
Thank you. That's much better.
All right, let's go next to let's go to, where'd he go? Okay, let's go to Chelsea McGlynn next.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Chelsea. Great to see you.
So I also wrote a Haibun, and I'm practicing lying in my poetry because I'm not good at not telling the truth. So this is a combination of 3 people, actually, but I'm pretending it's one person.
Oh, great.
Biology lesson. My lab partner plucked at the wet flakes of orange and gold, skimming the loose labels out of the water bath. We thought we'd learn about respiration and photosynthesis, but freshman bio required learning skills that lurked below the surface. How to light a Bunsen burner, how to focus a microscope, how to tape your vials so that your labels wouldn't float away. Our professor smirked and told us to do it over again. Nothing like a mistake to cement a lesson into a student's head. Over the sound of our pipettes clicking and popping, we talked. He learned about my fear of moon bounces. What if it collapses on me? And I about his fear of deep, dark water. I don't like what I can't see. Later, when he drove back to his dorm from the bar, his tires slipped on wet, fallen leaves. Wrenching the wheel, he flipped into the pond. After the EMTs fished him out and wrapped his broken collarbone, they told him any passengers of his would have drowned. Skimming the surface, fallen leaves.
Yeah, I love the haiku at the end. That's an erasure haiku. So those skimming the surface, fallen leaves were hidden in the prose. I love that. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got a lot of science today too. A little lab work going on. Thanks for sharing that, Chelsea.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chelsea McClellan with biology lesson. No, Chelsea McGlynn. Sorry. Chelsea McGlynn with biology lesson. Next, let's go to Dennis Usden.
Morning.
Hey, Dennis. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hello, guys. How are you?
Good.
Okay. This was self-explanatory. The title is Fragapanophobia. Okay. My friend, soon to be 60, hates his own birthday, like a coming of a demon scratching at his door. He flinches at the mention of the date, a whisper of a curse, a thread unraveling clothing of his sanity. There is a name to this phenomenon. It's fragapanophobia, the agony of your own birthday, a flame burning his fingers instead of the candles. When he remembers past celebrations, they replay like scratches on an old record. Eighth graders not showing up for his party, a silent coffin in his childhood, the forced singing of that tune, a balloon that popped in his face, artificial postcard greetings from his dentist, a gunshot down the empty hall, his mother screaming at him for his tears, his dad who died on the 20th birthday, all the gifts he never received. Now that day of birth is shared with Trump. He feels exuberant, alone, a cave that closes off his memories. On this, his birthday of affliction, crying jags are the best treatment. For his birthday phobia, the clock resets.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a tough one to have, especially with Facebook reminding you every time and all those things. Fragapanophobia. Yeah, very interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that. That's a tough story. Thanks for sharing that, Dennis.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, there was Dennis Usden with a fragapanophobia. Next, let's go to Brian O'Sullivan.
Hello.
Hey, Brian. Great to see you.
Great to see you. It's funny that there was a run of science-based poems because I was thinking about academics that I know, a lot of them from the sciences or social sciences, who are very addicted to, and rightly so, all kinds of hard data and certain and sure information, and maybe sometimes are afraid of making any kind of a conclusion or a decision without having every possible bit of information, which means that they're afraid of making any kind of decision at all, really, in reality.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Dan, I think of that as like the academic mindset, actually.
Yeah.
Like, don't take a stand in anything because, it might not be true. But anyway.
I might be wrong, but I think it's a little less true of those of us in the humanities and arts because we just don't draw conclusions anyway. But we're fine with it. So I think that leads to a kind of a phobia, something that actually there's a term for it I found out this week that was coined by the philosopher Walter Kaufman, and that is the title of the poem, which is the cytophobia, which I don't think is a real clinical term, but it's a term in philosophy now. Okay. Decidophobia, PhD, must stand for poorest health decisions, like too much time in library stacks and little time at gym or track, or like bourbon to wash down dispositions. And it stands for person hoarding data, a lover of endless spreadsheet columns and connoisseur of the vastest volumes of trusty information, sure that a perfect decision can at last be reached. But sometimes an informed decision about, let's say, a surgeon's incision gets deferred or even gets stuck, gets beached. As the PhD keeps seeking knowledge, wanting to know most everything, and at last doing nothing. It's a truth we rarely teach in college. There's such a thing as too much knowledge.
So that's great. The last couplet's so funny. Did you think of that first and write toward it, Brian?
No, I thought of poorest health decisions first.
Well, that's great. I also love that some of the enjambment there, the data then rhyming with data.
Yeah,
very fun.
I screwed up. It said data instead of data, but the other way around.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, very fun poem. And that last couplet's something worth remembering too.
What a wonderful potential epigraph for a future poem, though, to use that last couplet. You could go anywhere from there. That's great.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for sharing that. That was
Thanks.
Yeah, it's Brian O'Sullivan. Once again, with a decidophobia.
That's what I have when I go to the nail salon.
Yeah,
I'm like the most decisive person in the world unless you ask me to pick a manicure color.
Yeah, what'd you go with last time?
Purple.
Oh, there you go. Well, you're supposed to hold it up.
Oh,
there you go. Okay. Next, let's go to Rachel Grieve. Hey, Rachel, how you doing?
Hi.
Hey, good. This is by no means as entertaining as that last one. Oh my goodness. But I did have a lot of choices for phobias in my family. So, like, my husband and one of my kids has this thing called submechanophobia where you're afraid of wrecks, but that's not the one I went with. I went with one where my middle son can't touch certain textures. It just drives him crazy. And it's funny because it's textures I really like. So
interesting.
About that. Okay, so it's called haptodysphoria. The skin of the peach is soft as a baby's hair, milk-fed and blushed with sleep, an inhalation of clean, sweet breath across the lips. It's the brush of the love before the eating, a deeper kiss waiting in a sunrise of sweet pulp. My son doesn't much crave a mother touch now. He shivers at peaches, shrinks from that soft skin of dust, the apprehension that crawls up his fingers to his spine dry as chalk, puckered as an unripe persimmon. I embrace him on tiptoe, reach up with kisses to that peach fuzz cheek. For me, he retrieves salad bowls from high shelves and opens difficult fruit jars. He fills my cup with wit from the pit of his lovely dark days of being 15. And sometimes I peel him a peach.
Oh, that's a sweet poem with that.
Nice
Thanks so much for
ending.
sharing that. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was Rachel Grieve with haptodysphoria. Let's go to Zachary Honeycutt next. Are you there, Zach?
Now we can't see him. No,
We
now we
gotcha.
can see him.
Oh, but we got no audio again,
Oh,
Zach.
no.
All right, we'll try. Give you one more shot after the next poet. We'll see, and then I'll read the poem for you if you can't, of course. But yeah, we'll try it again. I don't know the mic. So this is not you're not muted, but there's no sound coming out. Let's go to Kimberly Gibson Tran next.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hey, Kimberly. Yeah, always great to see you. How you doing?
Great. So my chosen phobia has been read about today, and mine's a story. And it's also a shape poem.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's not triggering.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's very easily be triggered by this one. That's what I've learned. So,
All right, this one is holes. To me, the plant's like a shower head. But for my friend and housemate, the lotus pod is loaded with a dozen torture chambers. I can't, she pants, and runs from the world market, palms to her sockets, like a grotesque Guillermo del Toro labyrinth beast, to be honest. It's there, the lotus, boring empty cells into her dreams. Another time she isn't okay is the day we watch a movie starring Shia LaBeouf. As the pan out of a West Texas desert reveals the digging inmates, she stabs the TV off. Holes, dot, and crater. Later, Googling lotus pods, I get a sense for what she's feeling. What trips her is called trypophobia. In a novel by L'Engle, she gags imagining the biblically accurate cherubim, which I admit is an outrageous angel of wings and eyes on wings. Listen, I say, you can't let this keep you from living. We compromise. I promise not to buy pomegranate or honeycomb. We strip pores religiously. Halloween, she lets me gouge out the guts and pumpkin seeds. Then, one day, a miracle. In our front yard, she falls into a hole, honest to God, invisible and under a loose metal cover. She might have dropped like Alice, except it was just one leg and the hole only a meter. I didn't witness it, but helping to bandage her shin next minute, she told me, when swallowed to her hip, instead of fearing the hole, all she could think about was how ridiculous she'd look to anyone passing on the road. We laughed our asses off, picturing the gaping social horror she narrowly avoided by hopping like a jet-fueled one-legged rabbit out of the hole and back to our burrow.
Yeah, well, that was a really interesting poem.
And really fun pop culture references, too. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, definitely. And, that is one, I can kind of relate to that, fear. There's that, like, it does trigger a little bit of disgust, those seed pods in the peacock feathers now.
It's one you can kind of understand.
Yeah,
like, even if you don't suffer, you're going to be like,
there's definitely,
ooh.
it's like the similar feeling of, like, seeing something rotting or something.
Really? I don't feel that way. I just think it looks cool, to be honest, but I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. This exercise in trying to understand.
This definitely.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that,
Thanks.
Kimberly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Kimberly Gibson-Tran with Holes. Let's see. We got everybody on the Zoom. Well, let's give Zachary a chance to come back by reading Nivita Karthik's poem, who was here a little bit. So you got nyctophobia, fear of the dark. And here's Nivi's poem. Nyctophobia. She sits at the edge of the bed, the night pressing against the window. The lamp flickers, her breath stops. Shadows coil in the corners, whisper things only she can hear. She won't move, not yet. Morning will come, she tells herself, if she can just hold on. Yeah.
I love the night pressing against the window. I think that's really strong.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely is. Great little tight poem. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi. Nivi Karthik with nyctophobia, which is a fear of the dark. And let's see. Let's read... Let's do Ted Guevara's poem, too. Ted's got a picture, as always. This is a fun...
I think that's from the movie Toys.
Interesting.
With Robin Williams from forever ago. I was obsessed with that movie when I was little, even though it was a pretty old movie when I was out.
So this is like a factory, a doll factory from Toys. I guess I've never seen Toys.
I wonder if I'm right. I could just be, imagining that because I became obsessed for inexplicable reasons.
I was going to say it was like the 60s, though, or something, this era.
It was made to look, it was set, it was either futuristic or something. It was made to look different.
Well.
That was why I liked the movie, probably.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fun. Okay, let's see what the poem is. This is Ted Bernal Guevara's History of Grief. And it's bassophobia, which maybe we'll figure out. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I'm not an encyclopedia of phobias. Bassophobia. Rumors start when the gate is open. You step out and expect level ground, but your decision-making eyes say 90 feet of fall, enough to pancake your mind. Recalled is an established fear, with circa references and all the village knows, the gate to keep them from coming in. But so-and-so swears he had died. His brain kept on reliving the impact. The piece of him still alive, tiny, flat, witnessed the fizz-out, and from there he mourned himself to life. Well, that's interesting. And then there's a second, there's a bunch. We'll only do the first one. Bassophobia. Very interesting. Well, let's see. What is bassophobia? We'll look it up one sec. Bassophobia was...
A fear of the Baskerville Hounds.
Oh, just a fear of falling. Okay. I thought I would have known the fear of falling. That's why. I thought it might be, it might be some nuanced version of that. But no, it's just the fear of falling. Bassophobia. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, Ted. And let's see. So let's go. We'll read, because Zachary Honeycutt was having trouble with his connection. We'll read Zach's poem. And that is this right here. The fear of using public restrooms. Oh, wait, Zach's coming.
Connecting to audio.
Connecting.
3 dots. 3 dots.
Check mark.
This is looking
Zachary.
promising.
Zach, are you there? Let's see. I see. Uh-oh. We see him. You got to unmute still. Let's see if it works. He's not unmuting. Oh. How about now, Zach? No, we're not hearing you. Something's wrong.
Zach is such a performer that I'm not sure this could be part of the act.
Maybe. Oh, that's a good idea.
I'm not
this
convinced.
Is so meta.
I know, it is. Zach is so meta. Yeah.
Okay, but we already read the title,
yeah.
which is not fear of failing to appear on the Rattlecast.
Yeah, that would have been very suspicious in this moment.
It is, though, instead, this one, which you'll read for him. Sorry, Zach. I'm not sure what's up, but we're happy to read it for you. And the poem is this: Fear of using public restrooms, a Villanelle Haibun. So that's a cool form. All right. I'm reading this villanelle etched in the stall with my pants down.
Maybe it was part of it. Sorry.
I probably shouldn't. All the freaks and degenerates lurking the mall. Any one of them could have wrote it with a small car key or carved it with an overgrown nail. I shouldn't read this villanelle etched in the stall. So why do I want to? To feel big and not small, like I'm getting in on some gossip I shouldn't. Read the private public thoughts of freaks, degenerates lurking the mall. I won't do it. I won't do it. I don't have the gall. All right, you talked me into it. Who wouldn't read this villanelle etched in the stall? Who wouldn't take stock of the gang signs in the stall, decipher the dirty birdie words, and softly let out a giggle? Who doesn't? You know what? They're a great bunch of people, the pervert parade, traversing the mall. Can you even begin to fathom what kind of upstanding weirdos shared this dirty stall? Who wrote scrotum words, scribbled testicles just for us within these dingy walls? I'm reading this villanelle etched in the stall for the freaks, degenerates lurking the mall. Gregory loves Sue. Gonna kill you, sucker. Balls. I flushed the toilet. There you go. That is the haiku.
Well,
at the
one
end of
wonders how we got that inspiration.
I wonder. A found haiku that inspired a whole, not only a poem, but a movement.
No, all right, we're going to cut ourselves off here.
All right. Well, thanks. That was really fun. And
Yeah,
I wish we could have heard you. I tried to do my best.
I know, you did
I
put
was
more
going
effort into the presentation.
a
I'm
little
sure
bit
Zachary's
more.
very proud of you, too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks. There was Zachary Honeycutt's Villanelle Haibun, The Fear of Using Public Restrooms. All right, and that's going to wrap up the prompt lines for this week, the whole thing. And now we're going to go to the coup of the week. And the coup of the week, which is not a saiku, as we mentioned before, is this. It's not based on anything except for some of our experiences this week. In a week in which we went to Desert X, which was really a lot of fun, and watched some crows struggling in the wind.
Made an AWP, or a cameo at AWP.
Made a cameo at the AWP, and we also went to a church for the first time.
Yeah,
in a
together.
While.
Yeah,
and
the first time together.
Together. Yeah, the first time, and just for the first time. I mean, when's the last time I went?
I mean,
don't
I've
know.
been to church a bunch of times.
Yeah.
It was not the first time. I don't want to hurt my mom's feelings.
Well, no. Well, I went a long time ago. I said a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a long time. And here is the haiku, right here. Prayer as the crow flies in a windstorm. Prayer as the crow flies in a windstorm. That is your coup for the week. And that is the show for the week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, sharing these wonderful poems. Lew Watts, great as always. Now, your prompt next week, Katie, is going to be what?
So, with it being just about to turn April, we are going to write a poem that includes a prank and ends with a question. So the prank is a reference to April Fool's Day. And then the question is because if you've listened to the Poetry Space, where our most recent episode is about part 1 of how to write an interesting poem, I think it's a super useful episode, so I really hope a lot of people get stuff out of it. But one of the things that came up recently is I have this issue with I generally don't like it when poems end in a question. So I want you all to prove me wrong. So I'm excited. And then I also want to say that we're closing out this month's submissions, tomorrow being the last day of the month. So this will be the first prompt for next month's. And then I also wanted to bring up something you mentioned, since there's been so much talk of haiku, that I am reading still for One Arts 2025 Haiku Anthology, and tomorrow is the last day to go ahead and submit for that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a lot of stuff coming up. So tomorrow is the deadline for that. The deadline for your prompt poem of the month. So the last, and we've had, this is a 5 prompts for this week, which, a couple for this month. Yeah. Whereas the last month there was only 3, so it's going to be a tough competition probably.
It's going to be a tough competition. Send your best.
Send your best, yeah, and just send a bunch so Katie can read.
Well, great. All right.
And and then so this next prompt is going to be for the next week, and you won't be able to submit it, of course, until we clear out, until Katie reads them all and replies, because that's the way submittal works. It doesn't let us update the little drop-down menu. If we do, it erases all that data.
Yeah.
Which we found out the first month. So
yeah. So please don't mark it with a different prompt and then explain in the notes, because that creates more work for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, actually, that doesn't happen anymore because it's going to be closed until we reopen it rightly.
Submissions. Anyway.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Well,
you.
anyway, yeah, thanks everybody for doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the prompt for this week. The guest for next week is going to be. Oh, I have to learn this. The guest next week is going to be Partridge Boswell. Now, Partridge, he was in the Musician Poets issue. He's in a band called Los Lorcas. And does this spoken word, folk music kind of vibe thing. Two poets. They both play guitar, and then they got someone on bass or drums, I think. But a really, really fun from music to share. Really great for this episode. And Partridge was in that Musician Poets issue. Also, we publish Partridge really frequently. So it's a musician who tours and is very active in the music scene, who is also a really prolific poet. A whole bunch of books and chapbooks. Most recently, Some Far Country is one of the books we'll be looking at. And that is Partridge Boswell. That is Rattlecast 288 with your poems that include a prank and end in a question. Interesting. And that is next Sunday, April 6th, the regular time. No, wait. Yeah, I messed it up. It should say 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll fix that. Okay. That it was still set to the last time for the last guys. 8 p.m. Eastern is the regular time. 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.
Good night.